I'm going to now introduce our first speaker. We're very happy to have with us Mirza Saaib Beg, who many of you know. Um, Mirza Saaib Beg is a lawyer from Kashmir. He's a co-editor of a recently published book, Life, Resistance and Politics in Kashmir after 2019, which has been published by Rowman and Littlefield. Mirza Saaib has been a Kofi Annan and Wagenfield Scholar at Oxford University's Blavatnik School of Government and a gold medalist graduate from Nalsar University of Law. And he works on legal and political issues of Kashmir. So I'd like to hand over now to Mirza Saaib.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalpana. I'm just going to try and share my screen so that okay, right. So I'll just try today to give an overview because we might have people who are not from South Asia as well in today's session. So just an overview of what's happened, what the claims have been, what the Indian response has been, the diplomatic measures they've taken and the measures they've implemented in Kashmir. And then try to look at the theories of responsibility, which are the speculation around who's said what about who's done what in this. And then look at the data overview of the civilian killings that have been taking place and how that has been suppressed by the Indian government till now. So on April 22nd, there was a terrorist attack in Baisaran Valley near Pahalgam. It's a tourist spot where lots of tourists went. And Pahalgam is it's a heavily guarded area as well. The Amarnath base camp, Amarnath Yatra base camp is in Pahalgam. It's a religious pilgrimage which Indian Hindus undertake, and it's a heavily guarded area. The place where this attack took place is about 4 or 5 kilometers from one of the largest camps, military camps in that area. And 4 or 5 armed militants opened fire on tourists, which resulted in the deaths of 26 civilians. The immediate voice from Kashmir on this was unequivocally clear, that no matter what the situation is, even in a war, we cannot blur the lines between combatants, non-combatants, because that is a path that eventually leads us to getting comfortable, even with the killing of children. So all groups in Kashmir unequivocally condemned this incident. And the claim that was made by a group called TRF, the Resistance Front, they initially claimed responsibility for this attack on April 22nd. And they stated in that claim that it was in opposition to the Indian government's policies, which were allowing non-locals, that is Indians, to settle in Kashmir. We can touch upon that briefly, or maybe in the Q&A, about the laws that India has implemented in the last 5 years, which are now enabling a demographic change to take place in Kashmir, which will allow non-Kashmiris to settle in Kashmir. However, within 4 days, TRF retracted its claim, and they alleged that there was a coordinated cyber intrusion by Indian cyber intelligence operatives, and they said that their initial statement was planted. They didn't take ownership of it. They disowned the attack, and the investigations by Indian authorities have claimed that they have found links to Pakistan-based groups for this attack. But as on date, on record, there's no group there's no group or no state that's taken responsibility for the attack. The Indian response to the attack, there are many-fold responses. So one is what is the internal response within India, then is their response towards Kashmir, and then is their response at a diplomatic level. So against the Kashmiri people, at the very outset, Indian media was completely flooded with terms like traitors within, jihadi sympathizers. The various kind of, the language began to dominate mainstream coverage, which led to a certain kind of dehumanization against Kashmiris. But this isn't new for Kashmiris. We have seen this happen on many previous occasions as well. So instead of seeking answers from the state, the Indian state, which is responsible for protecting Indians, as well as Kashmiris for that matter, or anyone who lives within the jurisdiction of India, instead of asking questions of them as to why the measures that they took since 2019, which the Indian state claimed were being taken specifically to combat such instances, why those measures had failed. And as Kashmiris, we've been asking these questions and raising these points for the last 5 years, and similar points before that as well, that the measures they've taken in 2019, such as the measures of operationalizing Article 370, would not be impacted. Those measures would not have a direct link or any kind of link towards combating what the Indian state calls terrorism in Kashmir. The effect of this theater of dehumanization in Indian media was that the Kashmiri identity was criminalized in bulk. And that toxic narrative quickly spread into the streets in India. And in Indian cities, in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Jaipur, Kashmiri students, Kashmiri business owners, small roadside sellers, and various professionals were harassed, evicted, or physically attacked. And property owners cancelled the lease agreements, mobs stormed university hostels. And this has happened multiple times. There's always, when these instances flare up, there's online doxing campaigns against Kashmiris, or they'll leak personal information of Kashmiri residents where Kashmiris are living in India. And in various documented cases, Kashmiris have been assaulted by various vigilante groups as well. And like I said, these are not isolated incidents because they form a pattern that we have seen before, even after Pulwama in 2019, and again now. The only thing that I'd say is slightly different right now is the level of intensity and the extent of state complicity in allowing these things to happen. Because when these messages are spread to organize violence against Kashmiris, these are spread quite openly on social media, and no action is taken against the people who are spreading that message. Uh, Quite on the contrary, there were some Indians who came to Kashmir and made a statement in Lal Chowk saying that they had come to set fire in Kashmir, and they had come to do something against Islam or to Islam in Kashmir. And this kind of rhetoric could create a situation of law and order. And the J&K police did take action in that instance, but that was within Kashmir, not outside Kashmir in India. But when these things do take place, the police, in most instances, either fail to prevent the attacks or they remain passive bystanders. And every time such things take place, even legal aid for Kashmiris becomes inaccessible because the lawyers are either threatened or the entire bar associations refuse to represent Kashmiris. And the entire communities are made to feel cornered, ostracized, or they're just left to fend for themselves. And in fact, in some cases, even Indians who express empathy towards Kashmiris are refused legal representation by lawyers in India. And various cases are filed against them for sedition or for things like that. So all in all, this isn't merely an emotional backlash. And this has happened consistently in an orchestrated, coordinated manner, which makes it look more like collective punishment against Kashmiris as a whole. And there are narratives going around on media saying that these people must have had food somewhere. Someone must have helped them. So every time you're buying something from a Kashmiri, you're indirectly contributing towards such instances taking place. So the media, instead of acting as a check on the government on their overreach, just ends up becoming a megaphone for majoritarian nationalism. And the consequences of this rhetoric will always lead to dehumanizing populations. And it lays the groundwork for violence against those populations. Because once you portray an entire group as suspect, then their rights become optional, their safety becomes negotiable, and their suffering becomes invisible. Apart from this, the Indian government took certain diplomatic measures. Sorry, I think the slides just moved a bit too far. So they took certain diplomatic measures as well, which started off by suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty. Now, of course, India cannot stop all the water from flowing into Pakistan, but effectively what this does is the suspension of this treaty allows India then to divert some of the water or store some of that water from three main rivers, which are Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab. These are primarily meant for Pakistan under the treaty, but India is allowed limited usage for irrigation, hydropower, but hypothetically speaking, they can then have a full-scale diversion of these water resources, which are critical for Pakistan. And of course, this would be seen as an extreme violation of international law of the treaty, and it could also be seen as an act of aggression under international law. Apart from that, they expelled Pakistani diplomats, they closed the Athari Wagah border, which I believe Pakistan had made some announcement about planning to open it up again soon. But they also banned imports from Pakistan and placed various media restrictions by banning several Pakistan-based content creators on Instagram and YouTube, whom they accused of producing content which was anti-Indian. They also took measures within Kashmir, which were mass arrests. First of all, they arrested over 1,500 individuals. They've been detained in various places in Kashmir. They have also sped up demolition of the houses of suspected militants, calling them possible hideouts. So the Indian paramilitary forces, security forces, they initiated operations to demolish these structures, these houses, which are being at best used by people who are related to suspected militants. So as you can see, there are too many caveats in this. There's no court order, there's no determination, there's no evidence to show that these people are involved in anything. And even if they are, whether that's a justifiable means of implementing the law of the land. But they have dismantled these houses, and this has become a consistent practice in India, where any kind of action that takes place is being met with demolition of homes of people who are accused, or in this case, they're not even accused; they're suspected. There's no court order, there's no due process. It is a complete summary judgment process where it's just being the bulldozers are being brought in to demolish these houses. Very briefly, just to touch upon the theories of responsibility, which is largely speculative in nature at this point. The first is Pakistan, because Indian investigative agencies have connected, they've stated that they have been able to connect the attack to Pakistan-based groups. They've said that they have some forensic evidence which suggests this. And the motivation is that they oppose Indian policies in Kashmir. But from Pakistan's side, the state has denied any involvement, and they have offered to participate in any impartial international investigation. And they do seek to de-escalate tensions through any kind of diplomatic channels. And all political observers will state that at this point in time, it couldn't be in Pakistan's interest to have a war or any kind of escalation, given their economic state and the way things are in the country right now. So they are claiming that some Pakistani officials have made this claim that there's a possibility of the attack being a false flag operation by India itself, to then justify crackdowns in Kashmir, or to reap the rewards for electoral benefits in India. But of course, there's no concrete evidence in support of that theory. There are also some questions being raised about where the US and China place in all of this, because the US Vice President J.D. Vance was recently in India, and there is a pattern that has been noticed where whenever important officials from the US are in India, there have been major flare-ups of violence, whether you look at the Delhi riots when Trump was there, or in the past when Bill Clinton was in India and the Chitti Singhpura massacre took place, where a large number of Sikhs were killed by unknown gunmen. There are reports from those instances, some survivors who have claimed that the unknown gunmen seem to have Indian origins, but none of this has been investigated thoroughly. So there is absolutely no clarity over who has done it. But what is clear is that the Indian state has failed to prevent it. And for media operatives in India, channels in India, to not even ask that question is a glaring it's a glaring sort of dereliction of their duty. And this point is very relevant because after 2019, when the Indian state deoperationalized Article 370, one of their main arguments was that the Indian state is deoperationalizing this article, which grants autonomy, at least on paper. There was no de facto autonomy, but there was de jure autonomy. So it was being done because Article 370 was allegedly enabling terrorism, even though the presence of Article 370 did not prevent the Indian state from taking any kind of measures in Kashmir. There's the AFSPA in Kashmir, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. There are many other laws, the Public Safety Act, Disturbed Areas Act, and all of these give the Indian state tremendous powers to do whatever they want in Kashmir. But the last few years after 2019, there seemed to be a perception being created that Kashmir is completely fine now. It's all safe, and you can all go there, you can travel there, just enjoy it. Whatever was happening in Kashmir has been crushed by Modi, by his policies of demonetization, or by his policies of deoperationalization of Article 370, and everything's absolutely fine. But what was actually happening in the last few years was that the bases where the places where militancy was traditionally taking place, they had moved in Kashmir from maybe from North Kashmir to South Kashmir, or some other newer regions were involved. But when you look at the data since 2019, on an average, 60 to 90 civilians were killed in Kashmir each year. And 2020 saw the lowest number of civilian killings at roughly about 50 people. Because there was a pandemic going on, there was a lockdown, so it had some impact on reducing violence. So it's not the policy of the government. It wasn't what happened in 2019 that reduced those numbers, but there were other factors responsible for it. And in 2020, the number quickly rose to 90. And the year witnessed heightened tensions again. There was increased targeted killings, including those of non-local laborers and some minority groups. And the violence level is slightly less than last year's, but sporadic incidents are still reported. But historically, if you look at since 2008 to 2019, the numbers don't differ greatly, because every year there's an average of about 55 to 100 civilians that are killed. And with respect to militant activity also, not with respect to deaths, the numbers are not greatly different. So the total militant incidents in the 5 years, 2019 to 2024, is roughly about 1,630 militant activities, or about 280 to 300 per year, which peaked in about 2022 with 300 militant incidents. But if you look at the 10 years from 2008 to 2018, it's roughly about 3,400 militant activities, which is about 320 activities per year. So the numbers aren't vastly different. It's similar. But what also needs to be understood is that the state is the one that has a monopoly on violence. So there is a systemic violence and impunity in Kashmir, which has been a concomitant feature of the Indian government. And their unapologetic reliance on dehumanizing torture to exert political control, to depoliticize the people, has been a concomitant feature of governance. So while we look at the violence of non-state actors and the deaths of civilians, we also have to look at what is the state doing. The state is neither able to prevent that violence from taking place, nor is it holding its own people, its own representatives accountable for the violence that they exert. And it is the state's responsibility to handle that. But what we have seen is that mass violence, mass rape, mass punishment is seemingly justified against the Kashmiri population because someone has raised or someone believes in something which is antithetical to the politics of India. And much like what many other authoritarian nations do to their resisting or dissenting populations. But one last point that I'd want to draw attention to is that since 2008, we have had about 108 judicial inquiries which have been called into to probe various attacks, human rights violations that have taken place. And this is since 2008. So we now have a good 17 years of the most recent form, because the resistance and the activities in Kashmir has changed. The 2008 to 2016 period was largely civilian demonstrations, civilian-led. But of all those inquiries, there has been zero prosecution. There has been zero conviction. So that in itself should indicate what's going to happen over here as well. I mean, even in the various attacks that were taking place in the 90s, whether it is against Kashmiri Pandits, whether it's the Kashmiri Hindus, or whether it's against Kashmiri Sikhs, there has been no finding. There's no investigation that has been conducted in many of these cases. So these things are left open-ended, and it then leaves it in the hands of the state to decide in which direction they want to channel the anger or the questions that are coming. And the way Indian media has acted is similar to what they've done in many of the past cases. But I think I don't want to go over time too much, but I'll leave it at that for now, and then we can come back in the Q&A if anyone wants to discuss the policies that have been implemented in the last 5 years and their impact, or the allegation that what is connected to this issue is that point about the demographic change, the domicile law, and things like that. We can touch upon that in the Q&A then.
Thank you very much for that really insightful discussion, Saib. And yes, we'll definitely return to a lot of these points, hopefully in the discussion, which we're going to leave plenty of time for. So I'd like to now introduce our second speaker. So we're very happy to have with us Clifton de Rosario, who is a practicing advocate and is the National Secretary of the All India Central Council of Trade Unions, AICCTU, and he's also the General Secretary of the All India Lawyers Association for Justice, which has been taking up many of the issues which he is going to speak about. Clifton was also part of the fact-finding team which visited Kashmir in September to October 2019, immediately after the abrogation of Article 370, and which produced the report Imprisoned Resistance, 5th August and its aftermath. And I'll also share a copy of that report in the chat. So I'll hand over to you, Clifton.
Thank you, Kalpana. And thank you for organizing this discussion. I mean, clearly these are, sorry, my voice is a bit off, so I'm just going to try to be, these are clearly very trying times. And I think Saib has brought forward, some of the aspects and some facts which I think are very essential to try and understand what's happening in Kashmir today and what's happening in India, as it were. I think in trying to even address or understand this situation at this point, in the aftermath of the Pahalgam, this attack, I think there are three things that I feel are absolutely essential. Number one is acknowledging the abject failure of the Indian state in addressing the pains and the issues that the Kashmiri people have been facing. And I remember this, this thought going through my head when I was there in 2019 with a team that tried to, went across Kashmir, met lots of people and organizations in the aftermath, after the Article 370 was abrogated. And Kashmir it's an incredibly beautiful place. And it stabs you in your heart to know that, that in such a beautiful place, there is also so much of pain. And I feel that, not acknowledging that is something that is unacceptable. Of course, the second thing, and I think Saib put it very well, it's this killing, this tragic killing that has happened of these unarmed tourists. Also, one person from Kashmir itself who tried to rescue some of the people. This is something that's totally unacceptable. And of course, the third aspect is the manner in which even this tragedy is being, or at least attempts are being made to exploit this, by the kind of bigoted, jingoistic kind of forces that hold political power in our country today. I think these three aspects are something that we really can't, that we have to touch upon when we're talking about what's happened in Pahalgam. I think one of the things that even Saib kind of touched upon is the fact that this totally demolishes the entire notion that there is normalcy. Of course, the fact that Kashmir is probably one of the most militarized zones in the region, in the world, you cannot call that normalcy. That doesn't stand to reason. That's such a highly militarized place. You can claim for normalcy over there, but yeah, that was the claim that was being made, that was being peddled, and in a way, that claim now stands exposed by what has happened in Pahalgam. The other thing I feel, if you look at the kind of response that we're seeing, and I think it's very concerning. One is what is happening in Kashmir in terms of, for instance, the blasting of houses of people allegedly involved in this incident. This actually goes totally contrary to a very recent judgment of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of India, which held that any kind of a punitive demolition is unacceptable. You've had this particular trend, which began in Uttar Pradesh and then spread to other parts of the country, where the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, this right-wing party kind of holds power. You've had this particular practice where Muslims, particularly Muslims who've been accused of any crime, their houses being demolished with a notice of just a couple of days or so. This was challenged before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unequivocally said that there is no place for such kind of punitive demolitions in the country, and it laid down very detailed guidelines on how how this, if at all, if there is some kind of illegality in the particular structures, then how they need to be dealt with. So these blasting, this kind of demolitions that have taken place are in the teeth of that judgment. You have another thing that's happening, and which is, this is now, there's a proxy war that's being waged against Muslims. And again, this is something that you're seeing across the country. But you're also seeing a very strong resistance to this, or at least you're seeing a resistance to this. You are seeing people who are not taking this lying down. Most recently, there were these three satirists, political commentators, Nia Singh Rathore, Dr. Medusa, and somebody, this who goes by the name of Ranting Gola. All of them have been slapped with draconian charges only because they're raising questions of the administrative and intelligence lapses that have led to this particular, this tragedy in Pahalgam. So on the one hand, you have the right-wing forces which are trying to milk this. You also have the Prime Minister, for instance, who was not in the country when this happened, who cut his trip short and came back to India, not to go to Kashmir, but to go to Bihar and give a speech over there. And of course, Bihar, it's a very open and shut case as why he's going to Bihar, because Bihar goes to elections later this year. So you obviously have that entire effort that's being done. But you're also seeing a kind of opposition that is happening to it. And I think there are questions being asked now, and there are people who are raising their voices, even in this situation. And I think some of the questions that you really need to ask is about who's going to take accountability for the lapses that are so apparent. And Prime Minister Modi is somebody who did not flinch in seeking this very same accountability when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, asking several questions of the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when any incident took place in the Kashmir Valley, demanding accountability, demanding for heads to roll. But any question that is raised now insofar as the security or the intelligence lapses in regard to Pahalgam are being clamped down. But again, I would say that these are questions that need to be asked. The second point I'd like to make here is that Jammu and Kashmir is a union territory post abrogation and the kind of restructuring that took place around it. So the entire onus now rests with the union government. In fact, there was a briefing a couple of weeks before this incident took place. So there are now demands that are coming out that the Home Minister has to, own up to what has happened, and he has to pay the price, that, he has to step down from this. And of course, while all this is happening, if you look at what the media is doing, I mean, it's just outrageous. Besides the kind of chest thumping, warmongering that they're trying, there's really nothing else that they have to offer. And I think this is something that's not really surprising, given the way the media is kind of completely bought into a part of this entire project of the right wing of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and the Sangh Parivar in India. So you have the media that is really pushing for this, and you're having statements being made like you need a final solution, you need an Israel-like response to Gaza. You're having all these things being said on television, in the media, and basic kind of warmongering. And I think for many of us, that is something that is really not acceptable. To even imagine a war between two nuclear powers, as it were, is something that is unacceptable. It is something really more steps need to be taken to diffuse that. And that is something that is happening. Of course, there are certain diplomatic steps that are taken, for instance, suspension of the Indus Water Treaty, so on and so forth. But alongside that, this entire kind of clamor for war that is happening, I think that is something that's really that's truly troubling. And I'd actually end here. And I think, there's something we'd have some kind of discussion. The only concern that I have is also that, alongside the demonization of Muslims, this entire collective punishment that's happening of Kashmir, and also, in a way, one really fears that this, is going to be used as a tool for the normalization of the subjugation of the people of Kashmir. And again, that is something that is absolutely unacceptable. So I'll end here. I think I've crossed my 10 minutes. I'm sorry. And if there's anything that I can answer the question and answer session, I'm more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Clifton, for sharing those thoughts, and also for speaking when you're on the verge of losing your voice. I know you've had a very long 2 days of intensive speaking, but so thanks for that as well.